When you buy Kroger brand products, you feel like you're winning. That's because they offer proven quality at lower than low prices. In fact, we guarantee that you and your family will love how Kroger brand products taste, or you get your money back. So next time you're shopping for the family, look for delicious Kroger brand products, because they'll make you all feel like you're winning. Shop now, in-store, or online. Bakers, fresh for everyone.
You're listening to The Drag.
This podcast contains strong language, references, and descriptions of domestic abuse, violence, and suicide. It also has graphic descriptions of gun violence in schools. Mental health is an important part of this story, so please take care while listening. Previously on this season of Darkness.
Martinez looked up at me and motioned me to get lower as 3 bullets, friendly fire from the shooters below the tower, splattered the wall above my head.
I was doing the duck walk as I was shooting at him and collaring at McCoy to fire with a shotgun.
As the first shot would prove to be instantly fatal, I saw him alive for only a split second before he was dead and of no more danger.
So I just dropped the shotgun, picked up my pistol, put it in my holster, and I said I had enough.
We knew it was over. Everything just went quiet.
Up on the University of Texas Tower Observation Deck, police officers Ranger Ray and Houston McCoy had just killed the sniper. Alan Crum waved a handkerchief above the deck's banister as a white flag. Crum, the deputized university co-op employee who joined the police to stop the sniper, signaled to those below to cease fire.
KKA 484 for the test of all units. Hold your fire. We have men on the tower.
KTBC News Director Neil Spels continued to broadcast over the radio.
The subject is now in police custody. What his condition is, we don't know. The firing has now stopped, and the time, it's 1:23.
For the past 96 minutes, gunfire had filled the University of Texas campus and the surrounding area. Now, it was silent. People began to flood out from their hiding places. Forrest Priest had hidden the Rexall drugstore on the drag for the entirety of the shooting. He now made his way onto campus.
It was a wave of people that came out of it. Was like lemmings going to the sea, that sort of thing. I mean, all of us had been holed up in all these stores along the drag. We just came running out towards the main mall.
For the first time, Forrest could see the damage on campus.
I hope I never see anything like that again. I mean, what those bullets did was pretty brutal.
The crowd wandered closer and closer to the tower.
Not a word was being spoken. There weren't any shouts of, cries for retribution or anything like that, or, get the blankety blank or anything like that. It was just, it was a silent wave of people just, one of the weirdest, really weird, man. Like, okay, we're all in, we're all in a state of shock, okay.
By the South Mall steps, friends John Fox and James Love had just moved Claire Wilson and Tom Ekman off the plaza. Claire and Tom were the first people to be shot by the sniper over an hour and a half ago. Now they were heading to the hospital. In the aftermath of the shooting, John and James could see the crowd growing closer to where the two had been lying.
It was like everybody moved towards the campus. It was like the main campus was full of people. Like a thicker than a graduation ceremony. It was everybody had been staring at that tower for an hour and a half during the event, and once it was over, there was something that pulled people towards the tower.
Neil Spels could see it too. He still had his mic in hand, tethering him to his nearby Red Rover. The Red Rovers were the local news station KTBC's iconic red station wagons. Reporters like Neil would drive them around Austin while reporting.
You can't imagine the sight. People came out of every building they could imagine, and they all headed to that main plaza on the south side, just flooding it. Hundreds of people from They just came running out, looking around, There was still blood on the pavement, everything. And it was an eerie sight in this sense. It was quiet.
Since 1966, hundreds of mass shootings have happened. The media has recorded and aired the aftermath. But Neil says this wasn't like other modern shootings he's seen since.
Now, if you have ever seen video recently, in the aftermath of shooting, people are hugging each other, they're crying, they're comforting one another, they're patting them on the back, oh, you okay? But these people, it was like zombies.
He'd broadcasted that the shooting was over. People were no longer in danger, but he still worried.
They were still listening to me on their transistor radio and just walking out in the open. I thought, oh my goodness, I hope my information was right, because if it wasn't, they're good. He's got a whole hundreds of people that he could target.
The threat of the sniper was gone, but the damage remained. The shooting had killed or injured over 40 people and impacted far more. And their stories were far from over. I'm Sarah Kinney, and this is Season 4 of Darkness. You're listening to Episode 6. On the tower's observation deck, Officer Jerry Day rejoined Ranger Ray and Officer McCoy. The sniper's radio was still playing. In an interview, Officer McCoy's daughter Monica read her dad's account of that day.
Day arrived at the scene as a transistor radio near the sniper's body announced that Officer Billy Paul Speed was DOA at the hospital.
McCoy wrote that he felt angry when he found out the sniper had killed Officer Billy Speed. Officer Day tried to keep his fellow officers focused on their job. He asked McCoy if he'd identified the sniper yet.
In a momentary flash of anger, I asked Day if he thought we should throw the sniper's body over the top. He replied in the negative and asked if I knew who the sniper was, whereupon I started to search the body and found a German Luger, which I placed under my belt before finding and handing to Day a Texas driver's license.
Ranger Ray left the observation deck and began heading down the tower. The Austin Police Department had sent Officer Philip Connor into the tower since he had previous experience as a combat medic. Inside the observation deck lobby, Officer Connor discovered the streak of blood trailing behind the couch. It led to the receptionist Edna Townsley, who had been hidden there by the sniper.
We had the lady that was the registrar was still alive, and Showquist and I were doing CPR on her.
They continued CPR on Edna until a gurney arrived to move her out of the tower. Edna was still alive as they moved her, but she had suffered a massive brain injury and a broken skull after the sniper both hit and shot her. When the gurneys did arrive for Edna and the 4 Gabor family members, the officers struggled getting them out of the tower.
The thing was, those elevators were so small they couldn't get those gurneys in there. They had to kind of stand them up to get them in there.
The elevators in the tower were small, so they couldn't fit everyone at once. They decided to move 19-year-old Mike Gabor first. Once the elevator arrived on the ground floor, the officers wheeled Mike's gurney down the hall. The officers, including Officer Connor, opened the tower's doors and moved Mike down the area west of the tower, where the ambulances were waiting.
So I escorted, as a matter of fact, it was the young Air Force cadet. I escorted him out on the thing. We were the first ones coming out of there.
The growing crowd surrounded the officers. At this point, it hadn't been announced that the sniper was dead, only that he was in police custody. The crowd didn't know who the sniper was or what he looked like. And they also didn't know who Mike was.
I think they thought he was the shooter, because there was myself and another police officer that were with it. I think they didn't know and they were grabbing at him. So we told him, back off, and got him in the ambulance. And then when they got him, I went back up to help the people do the extraction on the rest of them.
They moved Edna and the remaining members of the Gabor family down and out of the tower. A white sheet partially covered each of them. Brenda Bell, who had been in her Shakespeare class when the shooting started, had now joined the crowd outside. She watched the police wheel the stretchers out of the tower.
I didn't know that children had been hurt until I saw one of these bodies being brought out, and it was obviously a child, a boy. And he was completely covered with the sheet, so he was dead. And his foot was small. And that was, for some reason, that was shocking to see that he had killed really young people.
She's talking about Mark Gabor here. He and his aunt had already died by the time they were in the ambulances. His mother, Mary Frances Gabor, remembered being wheeled down a corridor, but then lost consciousness. Edna made it to the hospital alive about 15 minutes after the officers did CPR. The doctors treated her, but she died 2 hours later. The official cause was a gunshot to her head.
At Baker's, we know the minute a tomato is picked off the vine, the fresh timer starts. The sooner we get our produce to you, the fresher it is. That's why we've completely overhauled our process to shorten the time from harvest to home for our tomatoes, strawberries, and salads. Because we know how much you love fresh produce, we give you more time to enjoy your tasty fruits and veggies at home. So whether you're shopping in-store, picking up, or prefer delivery, we're committed to bringing you the freshest produce possible. Baker's, fresh for everyone.
Over on the drag, Bob Higley and Cliff Drummond had been helping people during the shooting. They hadn't realized the shooting was over and were heading to the tower to see if they could help stop the sniper. They ran closer to the tower, making their way up the West Mall.
And that's where all of the service trucks pull up, delivering books, taking out books.
Instead of delivery trucks, there was a hearse outside. As soon as Bob and Cliff arrived at the tower, they saw officers bringing a body out of the building. That's when they realized they wouldn't have to go after the sniper themselves.
It is over. At least with that shooter.
Nearby, Brenda lingered in the crowd after seeing the bodies transferred into ambulances. She made her way farther down the South Mall, where blood still stained the ground. She stopped by a small tin cup next to the stairs, remembering what she had seen just over an hour ago. During the shooting, she had witnessed 2 people run out of nearby buildings and over to Officer Billy Speed after he had been shot through the railings.
It was like in a movie. It was so hot that day, and so they had put water in a tin cup, and they had, I guess, tried to get him to drink it, but he was past that. And so they bathed his face. He was face down. They bathed his face and his head in water to try to cool him off. And when he was taken away, they left the tin cup. So when I was walking on campus later, the cup was still there. And I thought about taking it, but I couldn't bring myself to do that.
As she stood there, 2 people walked toward her on the path to the stairs.
And when I was watching, a boy and a girl walked by, and he was pointing out the places where people had been shot, and that was where Billy Speed had been shot, and he picked up the cup like it was a souvenir, and they walked on. I didn't want anybody to touch it. I wanted there to be a monument to that cup. It was like a tombstone. I don't know, I just couldn't, it just seemed sacred in some way.
The whole day weighed on Brenda.
Death is really ugly. I mean, it's really ugly. I completely lost my curiosity about death that day.
How had that curiosity come to you before then?
Well, you know, you would just kind of wonder, like, oh wow, what would it be like to be in war? What would it be like to see dead people? What would it be like for people to die in front of you? What would you do? How would you feel? All that just completely vanished. And it was really sad. It was really sad seeing those bodies be picked up and just the way they were being picked up and the looseness of they were gone.
Brenda said she always thought if she was put in a situation like that, she'd be a hero.
And I'd read these books that were written about the heroic Marines during World War II and, you know, how they risked their lives. And just, for a girl, I was kind of fascinated with those stories. But what it was like for me when I saw the possibility of actually putting yourself in real danger to help someone who was obviously hurt and possibly bleeding to death, it was uncomfortable and hugely disappointing to realize that was never going to be me. I was too afraid. I was too afraid to risk that kind of danger. And so was 98% of the people in the English building.
Over the years, different questions replaced those about death in her mind.
I'm sure that my experience that day, with all the questions that you have, like, why did he do it? How could this happen? And what are all these other people thinking? You don't ask them at the time. I mean, I just flunked my English exam and I just wanted to go home. But those questions, those lingering questions, were probably very important in turning me into a journalist, because I did want to try to find some answers.
She later wrote about her experience on the 10th anniversary of the shooting for what is now the Austin American-Statesman newspaper. Over her years as a journalist, she interviewed survivors and heroes from that day in search of an answer for those questions.
The questions that I was asking kept changing over the years. And so my first one was, what is wrong with this man? And how could this happen? What's wrong with him? The more I found out about him, the less interested I got, and the more interested I got in the stories of all of the rest of us, the people who'd been hurt, the survivors of those that had been killed, how that one single incident it was like the ripples went out and they never stopped. They never really hit the shore.
While Brenda watched the tin cup on the South Mall, Forrest Priest took in the damage on campus. The bullets that had missed people on campus still struck stone benches and walkways, leaving large indents and cracks.
Those bullets were designed to do maximum damage to a body. Let's put it this way. When they picked people up, parts of their bodies were still on the main mall. It was not pretty. I mean, I don't know how any of those people lived through that. Jeez.
Forrest moved through the dense crowd closer to the tower. He could see 3 police officers passing through. 2 of them were holding up the 3rd officer, Ranger Ray, by his arms.
There was this tableau of 3 men, and there was a taller APD officer in his uniform and a gentleman in a white shirt, they were holding up this Hispanic officer between them. That was Martinez, okay? And he was in a state, I mean, his teeth were chattering, his eyes were there. I mean, his uniform shirt was just drenched in sweat. I mean, it's like somebody taking a fire hose to him, you know? And he was obviously in a state of shock. I mean, and the older guy was saying, oh, ease up, guy. You did okay, ease up, buddy. Okay, you're all right, you know, trying to soothe him, chill him out a little bit.
Someone in the crowd took their photo. In the photo, the officers on either side of Ranger Ray grasp his upper arms as they move through the swarm of people. Ranger Ray looks stunned. He still remembers the moment this photograph was taken, just minutes after the shooting had stopped.
You can see 2 people holding me up, or trying to hold me up because I was exhausted. There's 2 lieutenants, Lieutenant Morgan on the left and Lieutenant Murray Wells on the right. They were holding me because they thought I was wounded because of the blood I had on my shirt.
The blood was from the Gabor family, who he'd moved in the stairwell. Once Ranger Ray told the lieutenants he wasn't injured, they let him go to the police station. He had a lot of paperwork to do. Meanwhile, Forrest kept surveying the heart of campus until he saw something familiar.
Over to the left, you could see this nose of a vehicle that was painted maroon. There wasn't another vehicle in town painted that weird maroon. I knew that was the Red Rover unit from KTBC.
Forrest headed over to Neil Spelce's car, which was parked near the base of the South Mall steps.
I went dog trotting over there. Sure as heck, here's Neil Spelce in the door of the Red Rover unit with his microphone, okay? And I said, wow, man, I can find out what's going on.
Forrest had listened to Neil's broadcast in the drugstore, but hadn't heard it since he left the shop. He headed over to the car to see if Neil had any updates on the situation. Forrest stood there for less than a minute before Neil got an update from his reporter, Phil Miller. Phil had just learned the name of the sniper while listening to a police officer's radio.
So Phil heard that and wrote it down and came running to me at the mobile unit and put it in front of me and says, so I go on the air and I say,
"This is Neil Spelce with a bulletin from the KTBC radio newsroom. The sniper is dead. The sniper, apparently tentatively identified as..."
Neil broadcasted the sniper's name. I already shared his name in episode 1, which is the only episode where I'll be naming him. I've left his name out of all the other episodes, including this one, in order to center the victims' names and stories. So that's why you'll hear his name cut out of some of the tracks in these next few episodes.
So that's the first I'd heard his name, you know. After that, I tried to go on class. You know me, shoot. I'm supposed to be in class. Oh my God, it's 1:30. I went over there. One other guy showed up. We stood there for about 15 minutes. Like, I guess we're not going to have class. Okay.
Forrest decided to head home for the day and walked over to his car. The gravity of the day set in.
It all hit me at that point, just like, all of a sudden I had to just take a deep breath and just kind of prop myself up because I was getting in my car, I'm going to be a normal human being again, put the key in the ignition and go, you know, like, oh, what just happened? Okay, yeah, okay, all your subconscious is catching up to you, you know, and it's like, okay. I had to just stand there and take a few deep breaths for a little bit, and then, okay, all right, I may have to get a hold of myself and go on, so.
Forrest drove home. KTBC radio editor Joe Roddy had an update for Neil from Brackenridge Hospital. Neil had sent Joe over to Brackenridge as soon as KTBC learned of the shooting. As I've mentioned before, Brackenridge was the city's only trauma center, meaning if victims needed medical attention, they were likely being sent there. Inside, Joe had gotten a list of names from a hospital administrator. He had a list of 17 people, and he knew at least 2 of the people on that list had died, but he didn't know which 2. As news director, Neil weighed his options on whether or not to air the names.
You usually, out of common decency, wait to notify parents, relatives, friends, before you identify a victim of a crime. But Austin, small town as it was in 1966, I can't tell you how many people in Austin had some connection and or association or knew somebody or worked somewhere around the University of Texas.
Neil decided to go against tradition and read the names.
I said, everybody's interested in those names. Well, that's where, and I guess I'd still make that same decision, but it had a horrible effect. The effect was that as Joe was reading off the list of names, he was going down the names one by one, not knowing if they were dead or injured.
Here's Joe's report from the hospital.
It's a madhouse here at Breckenridge Hospital. At least 17 persons are here undergoing treatment. We have had unconfirmed reports that 2 persons have died. We have a list of the names. We will apologize in advance in case there is an error.
Joe read the names, broadcasting them across Austin.
The victims have been identified as Oscar Arreola, spelled A-R-R-O-Y-U-E-L-O, Sandra Wilson, Thomas Carr, Robert Hurd, Alex Hernandez, Argentina Espinosa, David Matson, Morris Holman, Karen Griffith, Emma Garcia, Harry Walsh, Billy Speed, Robert Boyer, Paul Sontag, Roy Schmidt, Billy Snowden, and Nancy Harvey.
Joe got ready to sign off when someone cut in over the line.
This is Joe Roddy at Breckenridge Emergency Room. Joe, hold it on. Hold just a minute. This is Paul over at the newsroom.
It was Paul Bolton, the former KTBC news director. He'd stayed in the studio after his morning show while the shooting unfolded.
Paul Bolton, who, as I said, had come in and to help there in the newsroom, he immediately broke in to Joe and said, Joe, I can still hear his voice, Joe, his voice was quavering. He said, everybody's interested in those names. I think you have my grandson on there.
Everyone is interested in that list of names. I think you have my grandson on there. Go over that list of names again, please.
Joe read the names again. Paul Bolton's grandson was Paul Bolton Sontag. He was the high school graduate who had been shot on the drag while shopping with his girlfriend, Claudia Rett.
All right, Paul. Oscar Arreola, A-R-R-O-Y-U-E-L-A. These names are difficult to read as they were handed to us. Sandra Wilson, Thomas Carr, Robert Hurd from A.
Joe read the remainder of the names again.
Arlena Espinosa, Robert Boyer, Paul Sontag, Roy Ray Schmidt, Billy Snowden, and Nancy Harvey. I'll repeat them again. No, that's good enough. We got it, Joe.
His grandson had arrived at the hospital about an hour before the names were read. He and his girlfriend Claudia were declared dead on arrival to Breckenridge.
His grandson was killed, and he heard about it on that broadcast. And I can't imagine anything worse. But I still have to say I probably would do that again because of the impact of that event on so many people who were listening at that time. Paul Bolton Sontag was the name of his grandson, his namesake grandson, who was on the drag with his girlfriend, high school girlfriend, and both were shot and killed. Claudia Rudd was her name. They were just 2 of the many victims that day, but how powerful that must have been for a man who had been reporting all his life on death and destruction, politics, government, whatever.
The names on the list weren't all accurate, and it didn't include people who'd been sent to different hospitals. Neither Joe nor the public knew this, but when he broadcasted their names, at least 5 of the people on Joe's list had already died, not 2. The news of the shooting eventually reached the White House. Then President Lyndon B. Johnson and First Lady Lady Bird were owners of KTBC, which is why they heard about the event so quickly. Lady Bird had also attended the University of Texas in the 1930s. President Johnson and Lady Bird both knew Paul Bolton and Neil Spelce personally. They'd heard about the shooting and learned that the former news director's grandson had been killed. Lady Bird remembered the moment she found out about the shooting. She was at an appointment at the beauty parlor.
On the way out, I heard the most hideous, appalling news.
That's Lady Bird. She kept a daily audio diary of her life as the First Lady.
It was incredible, too hideous to believe. I remember the exact spot where he was. 26th floor, where there's a balustrade that goes all around the four sides, while you can see the blue hills of Austin in the distance. He was shooting straight down onto the drag and onto all the campus. Somewhere, I don't know exactly where, I got the word that one of the victims was Paul Bolton's grandson, Paul Bolton Sontag.
President Johnson called Paul Bolton around 5:30 that day. Beverly Sontag, the mother of Paul Bolton Sontag, was also there when he called.
We're thinking of you, and our hearts are heavy, and we just wish there's something we could do. Beverly, we're thinking of you, my dear, and we know how helpless we are in a situation like this, but we love you and wish there's something we can do, and our hearts go out to you.
He told the Bolton family that Lady Bird would call soon, and she did later that evening. She called Paul Bolton's wife, Dolly. Here's Lady Bird's audio diary again.
I'd made a call to Dolly. Lyndon had called Paul earlier. How he does it, I've sworn I would never use that phrase. It's beyond me. Dolly said, very sensibly, shock carries its own anesthetic. We don't really know what's happening yet. Paul was at the radio station at his news desk. He heard Neil Spells, one of the announcers, preparing to go on the air, calling off the names of the victims. Paul Bolton Sontag. He said, read that again. His voice was not in control when he spoke to me for a moment, in contrast to Dolly's. He said the sweetest things about Lyndon. We've gone through a lot together, and all I could think of to say to Dolly, someday we'll go wildflower hunting and forget our troubles. It had been a day of many emotions, bitter taste of defeat in Lyndon's work, and the horror of unspeakable tragedy in a place precious to me, happening to people I know and love.
Back on campus, the crowd was still milling about the plaza. Jim Bryce broke away from it and went back to the student union. Earlier, he'd seen the white flag waving from the tower on the news broadcast on the union's TVs. He'd wandered around campus after the shooting ended, but now headed back to the union, where he'd been hiding for the entire shooting. He thought his friend Sandra Wilson was still coming there to meet him for lunch.
I figured, well, she'll be coming along pretty soon, so I'll just get something to eat. And I got whatever they had in the cafeteria, some green beans were part of it, and I sat down and I started eating. And a few minutes after I'd been eating, I'd stuffed my mouth full of green beans. Someone came in that, can't remember who it was, but knew me, knew Sandra, and they said, we heard on the radio that Sandra Wilson has been shot. Now, this is not an unusual name. But I just gulped and figured, okay, maybe.
He got in his car and sped over to Brackenridge Hospital. Brackenridge was the first public hospital in Texas. In 1966, it was a large red brick structure. Jim parked and walked inside.
I walked up and went to the desk and said, I'm here because I've heard the name of a friend of mine on the radio, and I want to check and see if she's here. Well, things were a lot less structured and tight and high security in those days. Not to criticize those days. Those were days there seemed to be greater trust. So they said, well, yes, if you know them, could we take you? Could you identify? So I went back in Brackenridge Hospital, and there were gurneys and people everywhere. And they took me to a gurney, and that was Sandra.
Stretchers carrying victims lined the halls. Sandra was on one of those stretchers. She was unconscious, but alive. Jim could see the blood on her since the bullet tore off part of her upper arm before it entered her chest. Around them, hospital staff scrambled to help all of the patients in the hall.
I said, yes, that's the person. No. They said, okay, thank you.
Jim headed to a hospital phone booth and called his dad.
I said, Dad, I just want to call you and let you know I'm okay. He said, well, good, son. How's that Aldrich, of course, going, he didn't hesitate like I said, Dad, I want to let you know I'm okay. He said, what do you mean? I said, don't you know? I said, what do you mean? And I then told him that people were being shot from the tower.
Jim told his dad what happened and that he was okay before hanging up. Jim wasn't sure what to do next, so he walked across the street to the blood bank.
But I mean, what else could I do? And they wanted blood, and I went down to the blood bank, which was just pretty much across the street.
Due to the sudden increase in patients, the hospitals were running low on blood. So the blood bank asked KTBC to air a special request for blood.
There is a chronic need for blood. If you have a desire to give blood, contact the Travis County Blood Bank. Please stay away from the emergency room entrance and stay away from the university area.
There is an urgent need for these types of blood. Type O positive, type O negative, type A positive.
Minutes after the broadcast, the blood bank was overwhelmed with people trying to donate. People even called the police station asking for an escort to donate blood. Over 120 pints were drawn from people that afternoon. However, Jim wasn't one of them.
And the person who did that, the nurse practitioner, the physician, whatever, looked at me and said, "You're not giving blood."
Hello and welcome to The Baker's Show. At Baker's, everyone wins when it comes to saving big. Because when you order online through the Baker's app, you get the same great prices, deals, and rewards on pickup or delivery that you do in-store, with no hidden fees or markups. So no matter how you shop, you'll always save big at Baker's. Baker's, fresh for everyone.
Save big on your favorites with the Buy 5 or More, Save $1 each sale. Simply buy 5 or more participating items and save $1 each with your card. Baker's, fresh for everyone.
We can't take blood from you in shock.
Across town, Ranger Ray arrived at the police station. The chief of police, a city council member, and other high-ranking officers were there waiting for him inside the station. They wanted his report of the day.
So I tell them my story, my part of the story, because that's all I know.
Ranger Ray knew he had to tell them everything, but he was exhausted.
I was having the dry heaves because I was exhausted. I was dehydrated. Back in those days, we didn't think about dehydration. You know, everybody runs with a water bottle nowadays. We didn't in those days. And I am fatigued because I had been doing all that running in 100+ degrees, no water, nothing. And then the stress of what's going on.
He also hadn't had the chance to change clothes.
The chief of police called Sergeant Spanhost, who was the equipment manager, and told him get him a new shirt. So they brought me a new shirt and got that one off and put it in a paper bag and gave it to me.
Then Ranger Ray made a request.
I said, do you mind if I call my wife? Chief says, go ahead. So I called my wife up. And she answered the phone, and I said, I just want to call you and tell you that I'm okay. She says, why shouldn't you be? You've been working traffic. I said, I'll tell you later. Okay. And hung up.
That morning, Ranger Ray told her he was going to campus to direct traffic. She didn't know what he'd actually done that day.
A little later, the phone rings, and it's my wife. You know, they say, your wife's on the phone. She said, what is, dear, I hear that you are wounded because of the blood, you know. I said, dear, where are you calling me? It's the police station. If I was wounded, I would be at the emergency room. I said, I'll call you later.
While Ranger Ray was at the station, the investigation at the tower continued to unfold. After finding the sniper's driver's license, Officer Houston McCoy left Officer Jerry Day to finish searching the sniper's body. They decided to wait for the crowd below the tower to disperse before they moved the body out of the tower. McCoy took a smoke break on the deck while the other officers took photos of the scene. He eventually left campus around 5 p.m. and went over to the police station, where he met up with Officer Philip Connor.
I hurriedly made my reports and turned them in to be typed by APD secretaries and left the APD with Connor and Day to finish the day with some Lone Star refreshments.
By the time they finished their reports, it was dark outside. They drove to a nearby wheat field to unwind.
There was one tree, and we had bought some beer, and we're sitting there kind of talking about, what had happened and everything.
Then they went over to Officer Billy Speed's house. Officer McCoy's son, Christopher, remembers how Officer Speed's death impacted his dad.
To see your friend get shot and then later on, after the incident, find out he had died, I could imagine that affected him greatly.
At this point during my interview with Officer Connor, he got emotional. He struggled to tell me about the remainder of his day. So he asked his wife, who was in the room with us, to tell me about what happened next.
Tell her about Billy's wife. We went over to see her.
Jeannie Speed, the wife of the officer that was killed.
Had a brand new baby.
She had a brand new baby. So you can imagine how hard that was, because all of us wives lived in fear of somebody coming and knocking on the door that your husband has been killed.
Now, Officers Connor and McCoy were knocking on Jeannie Speed's door. They came inside and sat with her and her daughter.
Well, we knew somebody had already been there, but we didn't know if anybody was with her. There wasn't anybody with her. Well, finally some of the wives went over there. A lot of people had small children, so it wasn't easy to do. And that was kind of the end of the thing. And I showed up at home and I had blood all over me. And I had no contact with her, no cell phones in those days.
I had no idea what was going on.
Officer Connor and McCoy had lost not only their coworker, but their friend. Jeannie Speed had lost her husband. Officer Speed had lost his future, like so many others did that day. Officer Billy Speed would never get to see his daughter grow up, or turn in his resignation to the police department. He was never able to fulfill his plans of going to college or working for the family photography business. His life was stolen from him just as it was from 16 others that day. Next time on Season 4 of Darkness.
Maybe before I got to the hospital, I knew something had happened to me, and then maybe I don't know. But I am sure once I got to the hospital and saw all the blood and gore and, all the awful stuff going on.
I heard the people when I was lying there. I heard people saying, "We've got to get help for that pregnant woman." And then somebody else yelled, "No, we've got to help the people there's still hope for." So I thought, well, I guess I'm not going to make it.
This season of Darkness is reported, written, and hosted by me, Sarah Kinney. Heather Stewart is this season's producer, sound designer, and editor. Katie Penchik-Outka and Robert Quigley are the executive producers. This podcast is presented by the Drag Audio Production House, which is part of Texas Student Media at the University of Texas at Austin's Moody College of Communication. The associate producers are Jade Emerson, Liv Gamble, Cameron Greiser, Mackenzie Matwick, Ashley Miznazi, Marissa Green, MJ Tilton, Guido Palufo, Liam Quigley, Aurora Berry, and Jeannie Sanchez. The cover art was created by Alexa Georgelos. Sophia Vargas Karam is the Drag's marketing and communications manager. Thank you to the Austin History Center, Neil Spels, and the LBJ Presidential Library for help with the archival audio tapes. Special thanks to the University of Texas School of Journalism and Media and Texas Student Media. Also to Jay Bernhardt, Rachel Davis Mercy, David Reif, and Gerald Johnson. A huge thanks to Leslie Schrock for all her support and guidance. The Drag is a non-profit educational organization that is made possible by individual donations. Please support our work by going to thedragaudio.com/donate. Every dollar goes directly to producing more content like this, while giving students an amazing educational experience. Thank you.
Hello and welcome to The Baker's Show. At Baker's, everyone wins when it comes to saving big. Because when you order online through the Baker's app, you get the same great prices, deals, and rewards on pickup or delivery that you do in-store, with no hidden fees or markups. So no matter how you shop, you'll always save big at Baker's. Baker's, fresh for everyone.
Save big on your favorites with the Buy 5 or More Save $1 each sale. Simply buy 5 or more participating items and save $1 each with your card. Baker's, fresh for everyone.